The rain in Manhattan did not cleanse. It merely turned the city into a watercolor painting left out in a storm, blurred, gray, and weeping. Lucas Sterling stood under the black canopy of the umbrella held by the cemetery steward, but the dampness seemed to have seeped into the marrow of his bones. Before him, the mahogany casket of Arthur Sterling was being lowered into the wet earth of the family plot. It was a mechanical process, precise and cold, much like the man currently occupying the box. Lucas felt a strange hollowness. He was 32 years old, an architect who designed spaces for light and air, yet he had spent his entire life suffocating in the shadow of the man now descending 6 feet under. There were no tears on Lucas's face, only a profound exhaustion. "He looks peaceful," a voice whispered beside him. Lucas turned slightly. It was Julian Vance, his best friend since prep school, the man who had been the charismatic foil to Lucas's introspective quietness. Julian wore a suit that cost more than Lucas's car, tailored to perfection, hugging his broad shoulders. His hand was resting, perhaps a fraction of a second too long, on the lower back of the woman standing between them. Elena. Lucas looked at his wife. She was a vision of tragic beauty in black lace, her pale skin luminous against the gloom of the graveyard. She was staring at the grave, but her eyes were glazed, focused on something far beyond the immediate tragedy. She didn't lean into Lucas for support. Instead, she stood rigid, a statue of marble that he'd been trying to warm for 5 years. He never looked peaceful in life. Why would he start now? Elena flinched, a microscopic tightening of her jaw. She stepped away from Julian's subtle touch, but the energy between them lingered, a static charge that Lucas felt but couldn't quite decipher through the fog of his grief. "Lucas, please," Elena said, low, lacking the softness he yearned for. "Not here. Show some respect." "I am respecting him," Lucas said, watching the earth begin to cover the wood. "I'm standing here, aren't I?" The service concluded with the murmurs of business associates and distant relatives, vultures circling the carcass of a titan. They shook Lucas's hand, offering generic condolences, their eyes darting around to gauge who else was in attendance. They were wondering about the empire. Arthur Sterling had built Sterling Holdings into a real estate monstrosity, and everyone knew he considered his son too artistic, too soft to run it. The speculation was palpable in the humid air. What happens now?
"Let's get you home," Julian said, stepping in to steer Lucas away from a particularly persistent journalist. Julian's grip on Lucas's shoulder was firm, brotherly. "I have the car waiting. Elena, you ride with him. I'll take the followers." "No," Elena said quickly. Too quickly. Lucas paused, looking at her. The rain drummed a rhythmic beat against the umbrella. "I mean," Elena corrected herself, smoothing her gloves, "I have a migraine, Lucas. The silence in the limo, it will be too much. I'll ride with Julian. We need to stop by the florist to settle the bill for the wreaths anyway." It was a flimsy excuse. The bills were handled by assistants. But Lucas was too tired to argue. The disconnect between them had been growing for months. Vast chasms of silence at the dinner table, cold shoulders in bed. He had attributed it to the stress of his father's declining health. "Fine," Lucas said. He looked at Julian. "Take care of her." "Always, buddy," Julian said, flashing a sympathetic, tight-lipped smile, but his eyes didn't meet Lucas's. They flickered briefly to Elena's lips. Lucas watched them walk away toward Julian's silver Porsche. He saw Julian open a door for her, and, for a brief moment, before she slid inside, Elena looked back at Lucas. It wasn't a look of concern or love. It was a look of pity, or perhaps guilt. He climbed into the back of the town car alone. The leather seat was cold. As the driver pulled out of the cemetery gates, merging into the endless stream of New York traffic, Lucas pulled his phone out. No messages, no check-ins, just the digital silence reflecting the physical one. He leaned his head against the cool glass, watching the city blur. He thought about his father's last words to him in the hospital, spoken through an oxygen mask. "You don't see the world as it is. You only see it as you want it to be. That will be your ruin." Lucas closed his eyes. He didn't care about the ruin. He didn't care about the money, if there was any left after the debts his father constantly hinted at. He just wanted to go home, pour a drink, and hold his wife. He wanted to believe that with the patriarch gone, the pressure would lift, and he and Elena could find their way back to the beginning. He didn't know that the car driving ahead of him carried not just his wife and best friend, but the executioners of the life he thought he still had. The car turned onto Fifth Avenue. The apartment, the penthouse his father had allowed them to live in, loomed ahead. It felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. He didn't know it yet, but the funeral wasn't over. He was about to bury something far more personal than his father.
3 days had passed since the funeral, and the silence in the Sterling penthouse had transformed from a mourning quiet into a suffocating pressure. It was a physical weight, heavy and static, like the air before a tornado touches down. Lucas sat on the floor of his father's private study, surrounded by a sea of cardboard boxes. The room smelled of old tobacco and expensive leather, the scent of Arthur Sterling. Lucas had spent the last 48 hours sifting through decades of his father's chaotic filing system. It was a labyrinth of paperwork, threatened lawsuits, leveraged buyout schemes, and aggressive acquisition plans. To the untrained eye, it looked like the debris of a failing empire, a frantic scramble to keep appearances afloat. Lucas felt a dull throb behind his eyes as he picked up another unpaid invoice for a contractor in Jersey City. "You're a dreamer, Lucas," his father's voice echoed in his memory. "Dreamers don't build cities. They just draw pictures of them." Lucas rubbed his temples, smearing gray dust across his forehead. He hadn't shaved. He was wearing the same wrinkled dress shirt from yesterday. He felt small, buried under the paper legacy of a man who had despised him. The heavy oak door creaked open. Lucas didn't look up immediately. "I think I found the deed to the Hamptons house, but there's a lien on it from '08 that I'm not sure was ever cleared. It's a mess, Al. It's all a mess." "Lucas." Her voice was sharp. Not loud, but cutting. It sliced through the stale air of the study like a scalpel. Lucas froze. He slowly lowered the document in his hand and looked up. Elena stood in the doorway. She looked pristine, a jarring contrast to the dusty disarray of the room. She was wearing a cream-colored trench coat, belted tightly at the waist, and her hair was pulled back in a severe, flawless chignon. She held her leather handbag with both hands in front of her, her knuckles white. She wasn't coming in to help. She was dressed to leave. "What's wrong?" Lucas asked, pushing himself up from the floor. His knees popped. "Are you going out?" "Sit down, Lucas," she said. She didn't move into the room. She stayed on the threshold, as if the carpet inside was contaminated. "I've been sitting for hours," Lucas said, trying to offer a tired smile. He took a step toward her, reaching out. "I could use a hug, actually. This house, it feels like it's haunting me." Elena took a step back. The rejection was so visceral it felt like a slap. "I can't do this anymore," she said. Her eyes were dry, clear, and terrifyingly steady. "I can't play the grieving widow to a father-in-law I loathed, and I can't play the supportive wife I don't respect." The words hung in the air, suspended in the dust motes. Lucas blinked, his brain struggling to process the syntax. "What?"
"I am leaving you, Lucas." The world tilted on its axis. The room seemed to elongate. "Leaving? Elena, I know you're stressed. The funeral, the media circus. We just need to get through the probate. Once the will is settled, it's not about the will," she snapped, her composure cracking for a fraction of a second before sealing up again. "It's about you. It's always been about you. You're 32 years old, and you're still a child playing with blocks in your father's shadow. Look at you." She gestured vaguely at his disheveled state, at the boxes, buried in his trash, trying to fix his mistakes. "You've never had a spine, Lucas. You've never taken what you wanted." "I wanted you," Lucas whispered. The admission felt pathetic, even to his own ears. "And you got me because I thought you had potential," Elena replied coldly. "I thought you were the heir to the kingdom. But you're not a king, Lucas. You're just the janitor cleaning up the mess." Lucas felt a cold sweat break out on his back. "Is this about money? Because I can fix the firm. I have ideas, Elena. My designs, it's not just the money." She interrupted. She took a deep breath, bracing herself. "There's someone else."
The silence returned, louder than before. Someone else? Lucas repeated. Julian. The name hit him harder than the divorce. Julian. His best friend. The man who had stood beside him at the grave 3 days ago. The man who had driven her home. The man who had known every secret, every insecurity Lucas had ever voiced. Lucas laughed. It was a dry, broken sound. Julian? That's not funny, Elle. We've been seeing each other for 6 months, Elena said, delivering the facts with brutal efficiency. He understands me, Lucas. He has ambition. He has fire. He doesn't wait for permission to live his life. He takes it. While you were agonizing over blueprints and trying to please a dying man who hated you, Julian was building a future. In my bed? Lucas asked, his voice trembling. You were building a future in my bed? Don't be vulgar, she said, grimacing. We wanted to tell you sooner, but with Arthur's health, we decided to wait, out of respect. Respect. He spat the word out. You slept with my best friend while my father was dying, and you call that respect? We're in love, Lucas, she said, her voice softening, which somehow made it worse. It was the tone one used for a slow child. Real, adult love, not this codependency we have. Julian is waiting downstairs. My bags are already in the car. She had packed while he was in the study. While he was trying to save the family legacy, she was dismantling their life upstairs. Lucas looked around the room. The boxes of his father's life seemed to mock him. See, they seemed to say, you lose everything. So that's it? Lucas asked. He felt lightheaded. You just walk out? Just like that? I've spoken to a lawyer, Elena said, pulling an envelope from her bag and placing it on the small console table by the door. These are the preliminary papers. It's a no-fault divorce. I'm not asking for much, Lucas. Just enough to start over. Julian doesn't want your money, and frankly, looking at this mess, she glanced at the invoices on the floor, I doubt there's much to take. She believed he was broke. She believed the empire was a hollow shell, just like the man who built it. Go, Lucas said. He didn't recognize his own voice. It was dead. Elena hesitated. For a moment, her hand hovered over the doorknob, perhaps a flicker of 5 years of marriage passing through her mind. But then she remembered the silver Porsche waiting downstairs, the confidence of Julian Vance, and the promise of a life filled with galas and power, not dust and depression. Goodbye, Lucas, she said. She turned and walked out, the click of her heels fading down the marble hallway, then the heavy thud of the front door closing. Lucas stood alone in the center of the study. He didn't chase her. He didn't throw a vase against the wall. He simply sank back down on the floor amidst the debris of his father's life. He pulled his knees to his chest and stared at the envelope she had left behind. He had lost his father. He had lost his wife. He had lost his best friend. Outside, thunder rumbled, shaking the glass of the penthouse windows. Lucas closed his eyes and let the darkness take him, unaware that in the bottom of the box next to his left foot, beneath a stack of tax returns from 1998, lay a red velvet folder sealed with wax, the only document in the room that actually mattered.
The conference room of Sterling & Associates was located on the 40th floor, encased in floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a panoramic view of a city indifferent to individual suffering. The room was temperature-controlled to a sterile 68 degrees. Lucas sat on one side of the long obsidian table. Opposite him sat Elena and her attorney, a sharp-faced man named Mr. Grass who smelled of peppermint and billable hours. Julian sat in the corner, ostensibly there for moral support, scrolling through his phone with a practiced nonchalance. He was wearing a navy blazer, open collar, the uniform of the leisurely victorious. The terms are simple, Mr. Sterling, Grass said, sliding a document across the polished surface. My client wishes to waive any claim to the Sterling Holdings shares, which, given the current valuation and outstanding debts, we understand are complicated. In exchange, he requests a lump sum settlement of $200,000 from your personal liquid assets and the transfer of the Mercedes. $200,000. It was nearly everything Lucas had in his private savings, money he had put away from his architecture salary, separate from his father's accounts. It was his safety net. Lucas looked at the paper. The text blurred. "Lucas," Elena said. She wasn't looking at him, she was looking at her manicured hands, folded tightly on the table. "I just want to move on. I don't want to fight. This is fair. It allows you to keep whatever is left of your father's business without me interfering." She sounded reasonable. That was the cruelty of it. She was framing her abandonment as a mercy. She believed, truly believed, that the Sterling name was now a liability, a sinking ship of debt and mismanagement. She was jumping into the lifeboat with Julian, leaving Lucas to drown with the wreckage. Lucas looked at Julian. Julian finally looked up from his phone. He offered a small, pitying nod. It was the look one gave to a dog that was about to be put down. "It's for the best, buddy," that look said. "If I sign this," Lucas said, his voice quiet, steady, "you leave today? No long court battles, no dragging this out?" "Immediately," Gress confirmed. Lucas uncapped his pen. It was a Mont Blanc, a gift from Elena for their first anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on him, but he didn't have the energy to appreciate it. He felt a profound numbness, a paralysis of the soul. The anger hadn't come yet. The grief for his father had been eclipsed by this surgical removal of his life partner. He didn't read the fine print. He didn't argue that $200,000 was too much. He didn't scream at Julian for the years of friendship betrayed. Scritch, scratch. The sound of the nib on the paper was deafening in the silent room. Lucas signed his name. Lucas Arthur Sterling. With a few loops of ink, 5 years of marriage were dissolved. "Thank you, Lucas," Elena breathed out, a sigh of genuine relief. She stood up quickly, as if the chair was burning her. "We'll have the movers pick up the rest of her things on Thursday," Julian said, standing up and buttoning his blazer. He walked over to the table, not to shake Lucas's hand, but to place a hand on Elena's, a claim, a brand. "Lucas," Julian added, his voice dropping to that smooth, persuasive baritone that charmed investors, "I know this sucks, but honestly, you need to focus on the estate. You're going to have your hands full dealing with Arthur's creditors. Elena, she just wasn't built for that kind of stress. I'm doing you a favor, really."
Lucas looked up at Julian. For the first time in days, his eyes focused sharply. "A favor," Lucas repeated flatly. "Yeah," Julian said, mistaking the silence for agreement. "You'll see, eventually." They turned to leave. Lucas remained seated. He watched them walk out of the glass room, their reflections ghostly against the gray skyline. He saw Julian say something that made Elena tuck her hair behind her ear, a gesture of intimacy that used to belong to Lucas. The door clicked shut. Mr. Henderson, the longtime Sterling family attorney, who had been sitting silently in the corner as a witness, finally spoke. He was an old man, weathered like an oak tree, who had served Arthur Sterling for 40 years. "You gave her everything you had, Lucas," Henderson said. His voice was gravelly, unreadable. "I gave her what she wanted," Lucas replied, staring at the empty chairs opposite him. "She wanted out, now she's out." "You didn't fight for the money." "It's just money, Saul," Lucas said, standing up. His legs felt heavy. "Let them have it. Let them have the car. Let them have the illusion that they escaped." Lucas walked to the window. Far below, on the rain-slicked street, he saw them emerge from the building, 2 small figures under a black umbrella. He watched as they got into the silver car. He watched the brake lights flare red, then fade as the car merged into the traffic, disappearing into the artery of the city. He was completely alone. No wife, no best friend, no father. And as far as he knew, no money. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass. The condensation cooled his skin. He felt lighter, in a terrifying way. Like a kite with its string cut,
drifting aimlessly into a storm. "I'm done, Saul," Lucas whispered to the glass. "I'm going back to the apartment. I need to sleep for a week." "Not yet," Henderson said. Lucas turned. The old lawyer hadn't moved. He was sitting at the head of the table, his hands resting on a thick leather briefcase that he had not opened during the divorce proceedings. "Sit down, son," Henderson said. The tone was different now. It wasn't the tone of a passive witness. It was the tone of an executor. "The divorce is finalized. The timestamp on the decree is registered. You are legally a single man." "I know," Lucas said wearily. "What does that matter?" "It matters," Henderson said, clicking the latches of the briefcase. Snap, snap. The sound echoed like gunshots. "Because your father left specific instructions. Instructions that could only be executed once your marital status was resolved." Lucas frowned, a flicker of confusion piercing his exhaustion. "What are you talking about?" "Arthur knew about Elena," Henderson said, calmly, pulling out a thick document bound in blue velvet. "And he knew about Julian. He had them followed 6 months ago." The air in the room seemed to change, the temperature dropping. "He knew?" Lucas whispered. "He knew, and he knew you wouldn't believe it until they showed their true colors," Henderson said. He placed the document on the table. "Prepare yourself, Lucas. You didn't just inherit a pile of debts. We need to talk about the trust."
The blue velvet folder sat on the obsidian table like a heavy, sleeping animal. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the New York skyline scrubbed clean and sharp, the lights of the skyscrapers beginning to flicker on against the deepening twilight. Lucas stared at the folder. "A trust?" he asked, his voice thick with the residue of the day's trauma. "Saul, I saw the files. I saw the liens. The Jersey City project is underwater. The Midtown Tower has a vacancy rate of 40%. There is no trust. There's just a hole." "That is the public portfolio," Henderson said, his voice calm, pouring himself a glass of water from a crystal pitcher. Arthur believed in misdirection. He was a student of war, not just business. Appear weak when you are strong and strong when you are weak. For the last 5 years, while his health declined, Arthur aggressively leveraged the public-facing assets of Sterling Holdings. He made the company look tired, vulnerable. "Why?" Lucas asked, bewildered. "Why destroy his own reputation?" "To flush out the rats," Henderson said, his eyes hard. He knew vultures were circling. He knew about Elena. He knew about Julian's inquiries into the company financials. He wanted them to believe the carcass wasn't worth fighting for. Henderson slid the folder open. It wasn't a stack of papers. It was a single, heavy sheet of cream-colored vellum, topped with a bank certification stamp that shimmered with a gold hologram. "The debts you saw are real, but they are isolated in a limited liability subsidiary that can be declared bankrupt tomorrow with zero impact on the parent company. The actual assets, the land rights in Manhattan, the blind trusts in Zurich, the intellectual property and the private equity portfolio were transferred to the Phoenix Trust 3 years ago." Henderson tapped the paper. "Read the bottom line, Lucas." Lucas leaned forward. He felt like he was moving underwater. His eyes scanned the legal jargon, the dense paragraphs of legalese, until they landed on the summary of net valuation. Total asset liquidity and valuation, $512,450,000 US. Lucas stopped breathing. He read it again. 512 million, $500 million. The number was so large it felt abstract, like a distance to a star. 10 minutes ago, he had signed away $200,000, money he had scraped together from freelance drafts and missed vacations, believing it was his only ransom for freedom. He had worried about how he would pay the maintenance fees on the apartment next month. This is a mistake," Lucas whispered. "It is not," Henderson said. "It is your inheritance, free and clear, tax-structured and bulletproof. And because you are now legally divorced, Elena has absolutely no claim to a penny of it. If you had inherited this yesterday, she could have fought for half. Today, she is a stranger." Lucas sank back into his chair. A laugh bubbled up in his chest, a dark, hysterical thing. He clamped a hand over his mouth to suppress it. "He played me," Lucas said, his voice trembling. "My own father played me? He let me think I was ruining the company. He let me think I was a failure."
He left you a letter, Henderson said softly. He reached into the briefcase again and pulled out a standard white envelope. On the front, in Arthur's jagged, aggressive handwriting, was simply, Lucas. Lucas took the envelope. His hands were shaking. He tore it open. Lucas, if you are reading this, two things have happened. First, I am dead. Second, that leech of a wife is gone. Saul had strict orders not to give you this until the ink on the divorce papers was dry. You always had a soft heart. You got that from your mother. In this world, a soft heart is a target painted on your back. I knew you wouldn't leave her. You were too loyal for your own good. So I had to make sure she left you. I made the company look like a sinking ship because rats are the first to jump off a sinking ship. I was right, wasn't I?
Do not mourn the loss of people who only loved your shadow. Now you have the capital. You have the power. Build something real. And for God's sake, stop apologizing for existing. Dad. Lucas lowered the letter. Tears pricked his eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of a complicated, agonizing relief. His father hadn't hated him. His father had been protecting him, in the only brutal, Machiavellian way he knew how. He knew, Lucas whispered. He knew she would leave if there was no money. He bet $500 million on her greed, and he won. Lucas looked out the window again. The city looked different now. It wasn't a gray prison anymore. It was a grid of lights, of structures, of potential. He owned blocks of it. He had the power to reshape the skyline. But then a cold thought settled in his stomach. Elena and Julian. They were out there right now, likely celebrating their escape, toasting to their freedom with cheap champagne, laughing about how they had left Lucas holding the bag of debt. What do we do now? Lucas asked, his voice hardening. Do we announce it? Put out a press release? Henderson watched him carefully. That is up to you, Mr. Sterling. You are the chairman now. We can issue a statement tomorrow. The stock of the subsidiary will crash. The Phoenix Trust will be unveiled, and you will be on the cover of Forbes within the month. Lucas pictured it. The headlines, the look on Elena's face when she saw the news, the sheer instant gratification of it. But then he looked at his reflection in the dark glass. He looked like a man who had been beaten down. If he announced it now, everyone would say he just got lucky, that Daddy saved him again. He remembered the look in Julian's eyes. Pity. No, Lucas said. The word surprised him. No? Not yet, Lucas said. He stood up, and for the first time in years, he stood to his full height. He buttoned his jacket. Let the subsidiary file for bankruptcy. Let the rumors swirl that the Sterling empire has crumbled. Let the world think I'm destitute. For how long? Long enough, Lucas said. He walked over to the table and picked up the blue folder. He felt the weight of it in his hands, the weight of a weapon. Elena and Julian left because they thought the well was dry. They want to build a life on their own merits. Let them try. I want to see how long their love lasts when the checks start bouncing and the connections stop returning their calls. You want to test them, Henderson deduced. No, Lucas said, turning to the door. I want to watch them. I want to build my kingdom in the dark, Saul. And when I finally turn the lights on, I want to make sure they are watching. He paused at the door. Cancel the lease on the penthouse. I'm not going back there. Find me something quiet, something small. And Saul. Yes, Lucas. Transfer the $200,000 back into my account from the general fund. I have a feeling I'm going to need some walking around money while I play dead. Lucas walked out of the glass room. He stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the numbers ticked down, Lucas Sterling did not smile. But the crushing weight on his chest was gone, replaced by a cold, burning engine of purpose. The janitor was gone. The architect had arrived.
6 months later, New York had turned cold. The humidity of summer had hardened into a biting November frost that rattled the window panes of the city. In a converted warehouse in Dumbo, far removed from the gilded cages of the Upper East Side, Lucas Sterling sat at a drafting table. The space was open, industrial, and filled with the scent of fresh coffee and graphite. This was the headquarters of Phoenix Architecture, a boutique firm that had appeared out of nowhere 3 months ago. To the public, Lucas was a cautionary tale, the heir who had lost the family empire to bankruptcy. The news had run the story for weeks. Sterling subsidiary files for Chapter 11. Real estate giant crumbles. The world believed Lucas was scraping by on the remnants of a ruined legacy. The reality, however, was sitting on the encrypted server humming in the corner. The acquisition of the Hudson Yards lot is complete, Saul Henderson said, stepping out of the small glass-walled office at the back. The old lawyer had traded his 3-piece suits for heavy wool cardigans, enjoying the subterfuge as much as Lucas. The seller has no idea the money came from the Sterling Trust. They think it's a foreign consortium. Lucas didn't look up from his blueprint. He was sketching a spire, a sharp, aggressive line of steel and glass. Good. And the tenant lease for the commercial space on Fifth Avenue? Renewed, at a 30% hike. Excellent. Lucas finally looked up. The 6 months had changed him physically. The softness around his jaw was gone, replaced by the sharp angles of a man who boxed 3 times a week. He wore a simple black cashmere sweater and jeans, expensive but quiet. He looked younger, yet infinitely more dangerous. You have a meeting with the city planning commissioner at 2. He thinks he's meeting a struggling architect begging for a permit. He doesn't know he's meeting the man who owns the debt on his brother's construction company. I'll be gentle. Lucas said, a faint, dry smile touching his lips. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He stood up and walked to the window, looking across the East River toward Manhattan. Somewhere in that concrete jungle, Elena and Julian were living the life they had chosen. He hadn't spoken to them since the day in the law firm. He hadn't blocked their numbers, but they had never called. Why would they? They thought he was drowning. 5 miles away, in a cramped luxury condo in Chelsea, Elena, she had kept her maiden name, realizing Sterling was currently bad for branding, was staring at a credit card terminal. Declined. The red letters were discreet, but the heat flashing up her neck was glaring. Try it again, she snapped at the boutique clerk. It's a chip error. The girl behind the counter, a 20-something with judgmental eyes, sighed and inserted the card again. I'm sorry, ma'am, it's definitely the bank. Elena snatched the card back, muttering about incompetence, and pulled out her backup, a debit card connected to the joint account she shared with Julian. She held her breath as the machine processed. It went through. She walked out of the store with the dress she didn't really need, but the victory felt hollow. Life with Julian was loud. That was the only way to describe it. It was a constant performance. When she was with Lucas, life was quiet, perhaps boring, but safe, infinite. With Julian, every dinner, every party, every purchase felt like a high-wire act.
She hailed a cab, checking her phone. No new invites. The gala season was starting, and usually, as a Sterling, her calendar would be full. Now, the phone was silent. People in their circle were fickle. They liked winners. And Julian Vance, despite his charm, was struggling. She arrived at Julian's office, a sleek, rented space in Midtown, hoping to surprise him for lunch. As she approached the glass doors, she heard shouting, "I don't care what the market is doing! Get me the liquidity!" It was Julian, Elena paused, her hand on the door handle. I can't cover the margin call if the commission from the deal doesn't clear. Julian's voice was high, tight with panic. Yes, I know I promised the investors 20%. Just stall them. Tell them I'm restructuring. Elena pushed the door open. Julian spun around, the phone pressed to his ear. His face was flushed, his hair slightly disheveled. When he saw her, the mask slammed back into place instantly. He forced a smile, hung up the phone without saying goodbye, and spread his arms. Babe, what a surprise! Who is that? Elena asked, dropping her shopping bags on the leather sofa. Just a nervous client, Julian lied smoothly, walking over to kiss her. He smelled of nervous sweat and too much cologne. Nothing I can't handle, you know how they get. The card was declined, Julian, Elena said, pulling away. Julian's face faltered. Which one? The Amex, the Platinum. Ah, right. I had the fraud protection team freeze it. Someone tried to buy a jet ski in Miami with it. I forgot to tell you. It was a lie. Elena knew the look. It was the same look he used to give Lucas when he was sleeping with her. A look of practiced, charming deceit. We need to be careful, Elena said, her voice dropping. The club membership is due next month, and the lease... Stop, Julian snapped. His patience fraying. I'm handling it, okay? I'm the one out here hustling. You're not exactly bringing in a paycheck, Elena. Your curating isn't paying the rent. The room went silent. It was the first time he had thrown money in her face. With Lucas, money was like oxygen, invisible and abundant. With Julian, it was a weapon. I left a billionaire for you, Elena whispered, the words slipping out before she could check them. Billionaire? Lucas? Please. He's bankrupt, Elena. I saw the filings. The guy's probably living in a basement in Queens right now eating ramen. We dodged a bullet. We're just hitting a speed bump. He walked back to his desk, dismissing her. I have to work. No lunch today. Go home. Elena stood there for a moment, looking at the man she had destroyed her marriage for. He was handsome, yes, but he was small. Under the pressure, he was shrinking. Back in Dumbo, night had fallen. Lucas was packing up his bag. The invitation arrived, Henderson said, holding up a heavy cream-colored envelope embossed with gold leaf. It was the invitation to the Winter Solstice Charity Ball, the biggest event of the year, the event where the elite of New York determined who mattered and who didn't. For Phoenix architecture? Lucas asked. No, Henderson smiled, his eyes twinkling. For Mr. Lucas Sterling, chairman of the Phoenix Trust. Lucas took the envelope. He ran his thumb over the gold lettering. Are they on the list? Lucas asked. Julian bought 2 tickets. General admission, not VIP. Cost him $5,000 he likely doesn't have just to be seen. Lucas placed the envelope in his bag. RSVP, yes. And tell the tailors I'll need a tuxedo, something bespoke, midnight blue. Are you ready? Henderson asked. Lucas walked to the door, turning off the lights to the drafting room. In the darkness, the glow of the city outside framed his silhouette. They think I'm dead. It's time for the resurrection.
The Metropolitan Museum of Art had been transformed into a cathedral of excess. The Temple of Dendor, usually a monument to ancient silence, was now vibrating with the low hum of 1,000 conversations, the clinking of crystal, and the frantic energy of New York's social climbing elite. Elena stood near the edge of the vast room, holding a glass of champagne that had grown warm in her hand. She felt invisible. In the past, as Mrs. Lucas Sterling, she would have been seated at table 1, right beside the museum's board of directors. Tonight, she and Julian were at table 42, dangerously close to the kitchen service doors. She adjusted the strap of her gown. It was a dark green silk dress she had worn 2 seasons ago. She had tried to update it with new jewelry, but the diamonds were paste. High-quality paste, but fake nonetheless. Julian had insisted they couldn't afford real stones, not with his liquidity tied up. Stop fidgeting, Julian hissed in her ear. He was scanning the room like a predator, though tonight he looked more like prey. His tuxedo didn't fit quite right across the shoulders, a rental, though he claimed it was vintage. I need you to smile. I'm trying to catch Marcus Thorne's eye. If I can get 5 minutes with him, I can pitch the Midtown deal. Marcus Thorne won't talk to you, Julian, Elena said, her voice tired. He knows about the margin calls. Everyone knows. They know rumors, Julian snapped, taking a swig of his scotch. They don't know the comeback. Watch. He stepped away, diving into the crowd to intercept a hedge fund manager who clearly pretended not to see him. Elena watched him go. A wave of nausea rolled through her. This was her life now. The fringes of relevance, the desperate hustle, the smell of fear masked by cologne. Suddenly, the ambient noise in the room shifted. It wasn't a silence, but a change in frequency. The casual chatter dropped an octave, replaced by a collective intake of breath. Heads began to turn toward the grand staircase that led down into the temple hall. Photographers, who had been lazily snapping photos of B-list celebrities, suddenly surged forward, their flashbulbs erupting like a lightning storm. "Who is that?" a woman at the next table whispered. "Is that a movie star?" Elena stood on her tippy toes, peering over the sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns. At the top of the stairs stood 3 men. 2 were recognizable, the mayor of New York and the chairman of the museum, but the man in the center. He was tall, wearing a midnight blue tuxedo that fit him as if it were a second skin. His hair was cut shorter than she remembered, styled with a precision that highlighted the sharp, severe angles of his jaw. He didn't look down at his feet, he looked straight ahead, descending the stairs with a predatory grace, moving with the unhurried confidence of a man who owns the ground he walks on. It took Elena's brain 3 full seconds to reconcile the image. "Lucas?" she breathed. It was impossible. The Lucas she knew was a slouching, apologetic man who wore gray wool and smiled nervously at waiters. This man was a monolith. He was flanked by the most powerful men in the city, and they were leaning in to listen to him. "Ladies and gentlemen," the museum's chairman's voice boomed over the speakers, cutting through the murmurs. "Tonight is special. We were facing a deficit for the new architectural wing, a deficit that threatened to halt construction. But thanks to a last-minute historic donation from the newly formed Phoenix Trust, the project is fully funded."
The chairman gestured to the man in the midnight blue tux. "Please welcome the chairman of the Phoenix Trust, Mr. Lucas Sterling." The room erupted. Not polite applause, but the thunderous, hungry applause of a crowd realizing a new king had been crowned. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Phoenix Trust? Historic donation? That implied millions. Tens of millions. Julian appeared at her elbow, breathless and pale. He had stopped chasing the hedge fund manager. He was staring at the stage, his mouth slightly open. That's not possible," Julian stammered. "He's bankrupt. The subsidiary filed Chapter 11. I saw the papers. I saw them." "You saw what he wanted you to see," Elena whispered. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The dusty boxes, the mess in the study, the passivity during the divorce. It wasn't defeat. It was a trap. Lucas stood at the microphone. He didn't smile. He looked out over the crowd, over the hundreds of faces that had dismissed him, mocked him, and pitied him. "Architecture is about structure," Lucas said, his voice deep, amplified, filling the cavernous hall. "It is about ensuring the foundation can hold the weight before you build the spire. Sometimes you have to tear down the rotting parts of a building to save the integrity of the design." He paused. His eyes swept the room. For a heartbeat, his gaze seemed to sweep over the dark corner near the kitchen doors. Elena felt a chill skate down her spine. He didn't stop on her. He didn't acknowledge her, but she felt the draft of his indifference. "My father built this city with steel. I intend to rebuild it with vision. Thank you." He stepped back. The applause was deafening. He was immediately swarmed. Marcus Thorne, The man Julian had been desperate to speak to was the first to shake Lucas's hand, clapping him on the back like an old friend. A famous supermodel leaned in to whisper something in Lucas's ear, and for the first time, Lucas offered a small, guarded smile. "He played us," Julian said, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and terror. "He has the money. He had it the whole time." "He has more than the money, Julian," Elena said, her eyes fixed on her ex-husband. "He has the power. Look at them. They're worshipping him." "I'm going over there," Julian said, straightening his time, a frantic desperation taking over. "We're friends. We grew up together. He's just making a point. I can talk to him. I can fix this." "Julian, don't," Elena warned, grabbing his arm. But Julian shook him off. He began to push his way through the crowd, moving toward the VIP circle like a moth flying into a bug zapper. Elena couldn't move. She stood frozen by table 42, clutching her cheapened glass of warm champagne. She watched as Julian reached the inner circle. She saw him reach out, tapping Lucas on the shoulder. The music seemed to stop. The crowd around them created a small, natural clearing. Lucas turned slowly. He looked down at Julian. He didn't look angry. He didn't look hurt. He looked at Julian with the polite, distant curiosity one might have for a stranger who has mistaken you for someone else. Elena couldn't hear what was said, but she saw the body language. She saw Lucas say 2 or 3 words, his face impassive. She saw that people around Lucas, the mayor, the billionaires, glanced at Julian with confusion and disdain. Then, Lucas turned his back. He simply turned around and resumed his conversation with Marcus Thorne. The wall of tuxedo backs closed up, shutting Julian out completely. Julian stood there for a moment, red-faced and shrinking, before retreating. He walked back toward Elena, his gait uneven, his eyes wide with shock. "What did he say?" Elena asked when he reached her. Her voice was barely a whisper. Julian swallowed hard. He looked sick. "He said," Julian's voice cracked. "He said, 'I'm sorry, do I know you?'" Elena closed her eyes. The cruelty of it was perfect. It was absolute. Lucas hadn't screamed or made a scene. He had simply erased them. The orchestra began to play a waltz. In the center of the room, under the lights, Lucas Sterling moved through the crowd, a titan of industry, while in the shadows, Elena realized that the man she had divorced was not the man who had died. The man who died was the one who loved her. The man in the spotlight was something else entirely, and he was terrifying.
Desperation has a specific smell. To Elena, it smelled like the stale interior of a taxi cab and the metallic tang of adrenaline that had coated the back of her throat for weeks. It had been a month since the Met Gala. In that time, the silence from the world of high society had been deafening. The invites had stopped coming. The phone calls went to voicemail. It was as if she and Julian had been marked with scarlet letters, visible only to those who checked bank balances and social standing. Julian Vance was disintegrating. The facade of the charming, invincible broker had eroded, revealing a frantic, sweaty man terrified of prison. His firm was under investigation by the SEC. A tip-off, anonymous but precise, had triggered an audit that froze his remaining assets. "We have to go," Julian said, adjusting his tie in the reflection of the taxi window. His hands were shaking. "This is the only way, Elena. He's the only one with the capital to buy out the debt before the Fed sees the accounts. If he buys the debt, the investigation goes away. It becomes a private matter." "He won't help you, Julian," Elena said, staring out at the rain-streaked streets of Chelsea. "He hates us. He acted like he didn't know you." "That was theater," Julian snapped, turning to her. His eyes were rimmed with red, sleeplessness carving deep lines into his face. "It was a power move. He's sentimental deep down. He's the guy who used to rescue stray dogs. I just need to get him in a room. I need to remind him of who we were. The Three Musketeers, remember? He loved that." Elena looked away. She remembered. She remembered how Lucas used to look at them with adoration. She also remembered how she had exploited that adoration to pave her exit. The taxi pulled up to the curb of the new Sterling Spire in Hudson Yards. It was a monolith of glass and steel that pierced the clouds, a physical manifestation of Lucas's resurrection. Tonight was the private viewing of the Sky Garden, an architectural marvel on the 90th floor. They weren't on the list. Julian had paid a caterer $500 to let them in through the service elevator. It was a humiliation that burned Elena's skin, sneaking into her ex-husband's triumph like a rot scurrying through the wainscoting. The elevator ride was silent and nauseatingly fast. When the doors opened, they stepped not into a hallway, but into a forest in the sky. The 90th floor was breathtaking. 30-foot ceilings, walls of glass offering a 360 view of the tri-state area, and living trees growing from marble planters. The air was crisp, scented with jasmine and money. A string quartet was playing Debussy in the corner, the notes floating over the low hum of billionaires and power brokers. "Stay close," Julian whispered, gripping her elbow too tightly. "And look happy. For God's sakes, Elena, look like you belong here." She tried. She smoothed her dress, black velvet, conservative, trying to fade into the background. She scanned the room. Lucas was there, standing near the south window. He was alone for the moment, holding a tumbler of amber liquor, looking out at the Statue of Liberty. He looked like a part of the architecture, solid, immovable, and cold. Julian took a breath, the kind a diver takes before plunging into freezing water. "Okay, let's go." They walked across the expanse of the marble floor. The click of Elena's heels seemed impossibly loud to her ears, a countdown to disaster. Lucas didn't turn as they approached. It was as if he sensed the disturbance in the air, a ripple in his carefully constructed sanctuary. "Lucas," Julian said. His voice was jovial, forced, the ghost of their college days. "Quite the view. Better than the dorm room at Yale, huh?" Lucas took a slow sip of his drink. He turned around. His expression was not hostile. It was worse. It was the neutral, polite expression of a CEO waiting for a pitch he has already decided to reject. "You're not on the list, Julian," Lucas said. His voice was low, modulating perfectly over the music. "Security is usually tighter. I'll have to speak to the team."
Come on, Luke, Julian chuckled, though the sound died quickly in his throat. We go back 20 years. I figured, old time's sake, we need to talk, just for a minute, man to man. Lucas's gaze shifted to Elena. He looked her over, not with desire, not with anger, but with a clinical assessment. He noticed the tightness around her eyes, the slightly frayed hem of her dress, the way she held her clutch like a shield. "Hello, Elena," he said. "Lucas," she whispered. The sound of her name on his lips, spoken without the warmth she used to take for granted, broke something inside her. "What do you want?" Lucas asked, turning back to Julian. "Business," Julian said, stepping closer, dropping his voice. "Look, I know things happened, things got messy, but business is business, right? I have a liquidity issue. Temporary. The SEC is sniffing around a clerical error. If Sterling Holdings buys the debt on my firm, pennies on the dollar, really, it's a steal for you, you get the assets and I get breathing room. It's a win-win." Lucas swirled the ice in his glass. "You want me to buy your debt." "It's a smart acquisition," Julian pressed, sweating now. "We have clients. We have a portfolio." "I know," Lucas said. "I've seen it." Julian froze. You have?" "I've been tracking your firm for 6 months, Julian. I know about the Ponzi structure in the mid-cap fund. I know that you've been using new investor money to pay off the dividends for the older clients. That's not a clerical error. That's fraud." Elena gasped, looking at Julian. "Julian?" Julian's face went gray. That's speculation. If you buy the debt, you can restructure it.
You can save it, Lucas. You owe me that much, for the years of friendship. Lucas finally laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. You owe me? He took a step forward, invading Julian's personal space. For the first time, the predator surfaced. You took my wife, Lucas said softly. You took my confidence, you took my peace, and now you want me to take your prison sentence. We were in love, Julian hissed, desperate. We didn't mean to hurt you. Love. Lucas repeated the word as if tasting something sour. He looked at Elena. Is this love, Elena? Standing in the service elevator of my building, begging your ex-husband to save your lover from jail? Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She wanted to run. She wanted to dissolve. Lucas, please, we made a mistake, a terrible mistake. Mistakes are spilling coffee. Betrayal is a choice. He set his glass down on a passing waiter's tray. I did buy the debt, Julian. Julian's head snapped up, hope flaring wildly in his eyes. You did? Oh, thank God, Lucas. I knew it. I knew you were... I bought it this morning, Julian, through a shell company. I own your firm. I own your mortgage. I own the lease on that condo you can't afford. Julian's smile shattered. And, he continued, checking his watch, I turned over the full audit to the district attorney about an hour ago. The police are likely waiting at the lobby of your building right now. Julian stumbled back, grabbing the back of a velvet sofa to steady himself. You rat! You set me up! I didn't set you up, Lucas said, adjusting his cufflink. I just turned on the lights. You were the one, stealing in the dark. Lucas looked at Elena. You should probably go, Elena, unless you want to be in the photos when they handcuff him. Lucas, Elena stepped forward, reaching for his hand. I didn't know. About the fraud, I swear. I have nowhere to go. If he goes to jail, I have nothing. Lucas looked at his hand, hovering inches from his sleeve. He didn't pull away, but he didn't bridge the gap. You wanted a life of excitement, Elena. You wanted a man who took risks. You have him. I suggest you stand by him. That's what a loyal wife does, isn't it? He signaled to security. 2 large men in dark suits materialized from the shadows. Please escort Mr. Vance and his guest out. Use the front door this time. Let everyone see them leave. Lucas turned his back on them, walking toward the string quartet, toward the light, toward the future he had built from the ashes of their betrayal. Behind him, he heard Julian's sobbing protests and the sharp click of Elena's heels as she was led away, not into a new life, but into the wreckage of the one she had chosen. The intersection had been crossed. There was no turning back.
The snow began to fall over Manhattan in the late afternoon. Tiny, dry flakes that swirled in the wind tunnels created by the skyscrapers, dusting the city in a temporary, deceptive purity. Elena sat at a small corner table in Café Sabarsky, a Viennese coffee house on the Upper East Side that smelled of roasted beans and old money. It had been their place, hers and Lucas's. In the years before the inheritance, before Julian, before the ruin, they would come here on Sunday mornings. Lucas would sketch on napkins and she would read the exhibition catalogs, dreaming of a life that felt more significant than the one she had. She looked at her reflection in the dark window. The woman staring back was thinner. The stress of the last 2 months had hollowed her cheeks. Julian was currently at Rikers Island, awaiting trial for wire fraud and embezzlement. His bail had been set at an amount that made Elena laugh hysterically when she heard it. She had been questioned, investigated, and ultimately cleared of criminal involvement, but the court of public opinion had been far less lenient. She was working as a junior assistant at a gallery in Chelsea, a job she had held 10 years ago. It was a humiliating reset, a complete erasure of her social progress. The bell above the door chimed. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked up. Lucas entered. He brought the cold air in with him, clinging to his charcoal wool coat. He stamped the snow off his boots on the mat, unwound a gray scarf, and scanned the room. When his eyes found hers, there was no spark, no flare of anger, no glimmer of longing. There was only recognition. He walked over and sat down opposite her. He didn't take off his coat. "Hello, Elena." His voice was low, modulated, the voice of a man who spent his days commanding boardrooms. "Thank you for coming," Elena said. Her hands were trembling beneath the table. "I didn't think you would." "I have 20 minutes, Lucas said, checking his watch, a Patek Philippe that cost more than the salary she would make in the next 5 years. "My driver is waiting." The waiter approached, sensing the tension, but Lucas waved him away with a polite nod. "Nothing for me." Elena swallowed hard. She had rehearsed this speech 1,000 times in front of her bathroom mirror. She had prepared arguments, apologies, tears, but sitting across from him, seeing the terrifying calmness in his eyes, the words disintegrated. "I wanted to apologize. Properly, not like at the party. I wanted you to know that I never wanted to hurt you, Lucas. I was lost. I felt stifled. And Julian, he was so loud, so colorful, I got swept up." Lucas watched her. He didn't interrupt. He sat with his hands clasped on the marble table, perfectly still. I know I can't undo it," she continued, tears finally spilling over, hot and real. "I know I broke us, but I miss you, Lucas. Not the money, I swear to God, not the money. I miss us. I miss who I was when I was with you. I felt safe. Now the world is so cold." She reached across the table, her fingers grazing his sleeve. "Is there any part of you that remembers the good years, before your father died, before the madness? Can't we try to find that again? I'm not asking for the penthouse. I just want my husband back."
Lucas looked at her hand on his sleeve. He didn't pull away, but the muscle in his jaw feathered. "Elena?" he said softly. He pulled his arm back, breaking the contact. The movement was slow, deliberate, and final. "The man you are looking for," Lucas said, looking her in the eyes, "died with Arthur Sterling." "Don't say that," she sobbed. "You're still you. You're just hurt." "No," Lucas shook his head. "I'm not hurt. Hurt implies a wound that is still bleeding. I am healed, Elena, and the healing process changed the anatomy." He leaned back, the leather chair creaking. "You said you felt stifled. You said I was boring. You were right. I was a boring man. I was a man who thought that loyalty was enough. I thought that if I loved you quietly, consistently, it would be enough to keep you. But you didn't want quiet. You wanted noise. You wanted the thrill." "I was wrong," she choked out. "It doesn't matter," Lucas said, "because the lesson my father tried to teach me, the lesson it took your betrayal to finally learn, is that you cannot build a structure on a cracked foundation. You and I, we are a cracked foundation. If we tried to build again, the first storm would bring the whole thing down. I can't afford that risk. Not with my heart, not with my life." "So that's it?" Elena wiped her face with a paper napkin. "You're just going to leave me here?" "I have nothing, Lucas. Julian ruined my credit. I'm living in a studio in Queens. I'm 40 years old, and I'm starting over." She saw a flicker in his eyes then, a shadow of the old Lucas, the one who would have written a check, who would have made a call, who would have fixed it. She held her breath, hoping. Lucas reached into his coat pocket. Elena's heart leapt. A check, a key. He pulled out a pair of leather gloves. He began to pull them on, smoothing the leather over his fingers. "You are a survivor, Elena. You survived my father. You survived Julian.
You will survive this. Starting over isn't a punishment. It's a gift. It's the one thing I actually have to thank you for." "What?" she asked, confused. "You forced me to start over. You stripped me down to nothing. You made me realize that without the name, without the wife, without the best friend, I was still someone. Now, you get to find out who you are when you have nothing." He looked down at her one last time. It wasn't a look of cruelty. It was the look of absolute, terrifying neutrality. It was the look of a stranger passing someone on a subway platform. "Goodbye, Elena." He turned and walked toward the door. "Lucas!" she called out, her voice cracking, causing the other patrons to turn and stare. He didn't stop. He didn't hesitate. He pushed the door open, and the wind howled, momentarily filling the room with the sound of the storm. Through the window, Elena watched him step out onto the sidewalk. A black town car idled at the curb. The driver opened the door. Lucas slid inside without looking back at the cafe. The car merged into the stream of traffic, its red taillights glowing for a brief second before disappearing into the white blur of the snow. Elena sat alone at the table. The silence of the room rushed in again, heavy and suffocating. The coffee smell, once comforting, now made her stomach turn. She looked at the empty chair opposite her. She realized then that the tragedy wasn't that he hated her. The tragedy was that to him, she was no longer a wife, or a lover, or even an enemy. She was just a ghost from a past he had already demolished to build something new. Elena picked up her purse, stood up, and walked out into the cold gray city, finally understanding the true weight of the inheritance she had forfeited.